Here's Spirit School, Chapter 5, entitled Just a Kiss. James and Lucy exchanged furtive glances while Anne was busy daydreaming. Later that evening, James was laid on his bed. Then there was a soft knock on the door, and this time it was Anne. So he invited her in sheepishly and was a little surprised. Hi, she said, I was just coming round to chat. Okay, said James, feeling nervous. I'm a little tired, I can't stay up long, he said wearily. She sat on the bed with a longing look in her eyes, and James tried to look tired, when suddenly she fell towards him and kissed him plumb on the lips. He tried to push her away, but she was too strong, and to his amazement she thrust her tongue into his mouth. Before he could protest, he found himself kissing her back, and they rolled round on the bed, kissing and hugging each other. James thought of Lucy, but he couldn't help kissing Anne's soft lips. He was panting heavily and his head was spinning. Eventually he prized himself away. Oh my God, said Anne, I can't believe we did that. I know, said James, but you definitely wanted to. I'm sorry, she said miserably. I fancied you the first time we met. James put his arm around her and tried not to feel like a love rat. That's lovely, he said, but we need to keep things quiet. I don't want to hurt Anne. That's cool, said Lucy. Neither do I. We have a good friendship between us that I don't want to spoil, she said. James was tired, so they hugged each other, and Anne went back to her room with her head spinning from all the excitement. As soon as James' head hit the pillow, he was fast asleep. He fell into a magical dream that was so real they wished that he would never wake up again. Anne pulled the covers to her chin and said a quick good night to Lucy, but she was oblivious and snoring happily. In his dream, James was in bed when he suddenly felt himself rising with the covers falling away. He was getting closer to the ceiling. Then he found himself floating down the stairs and through the door and out into the streets. It was pitch black and there was no one about. It was a weird sensation, like being on an invisible wave. He floated out into the deserted street and over the parked cars. He sailed over them and looked down to see the frost glistening on their roofs like crushed diamonds. Then he sped up at lightning speed and he could see the road passing by in a flash. Then a bicycle lane the road. He immediately recognized the model. Further down, he saw himself lying immobile, and at that moment he was pulled back at incredible speeds, and he landed back in his own body with a bump. He woke up bathed in sweat. The next day he told Anne and Lucy over breakfast what had happened. They listened avidly and said, It's good you were reminded of the past, however difficult, said Anne. I don't know about that, said Lucy. James laughed. Well, it was definitely freaky, he said, and so realistic. He decided to go to the library and research the subject. He found a book on the paranormal. It was easy to do as there were lots of them. Leafing through it, he found a section on out-of-body experiences. He soon realized that you didn't need to be in a life-or-death situation to experience one. He read on quickly. There had been many examples of out-of-body experiences through the ages, and it often happened to adolescents or people in crisis. Some were suspended and attached to a silver cord, which kept them bound to their body and pulled them back at incredible speed. Just as he was reading, he felt goosebumps on his arms rising, and he felt that someone was standing behind him. He looked round to see the same old librarian staring back at him, but this time she had an angry look on her face and her eyes were blazing like coal. He opened his mouth to speak, and at that moment she let out a piercing scream which rattled the walls of the library and caused the books to fall off the shelves as if in fright. He dropped his book and ran. He could hear her scream behind him. There was no way he was going to go back. A few more pupils followed him, and a teacher came out to see what all the commotion was about. Mr. Small had an ironic name as he was 6'5" and thin as a rake. He would have made a great basketball player. There were rumors he had arrived at the school after an accident riding under a low bridge, but that wasn't proven. He ran into the library to see what was going on. When he looked round, there were books scattered everywhere. He approached an old lady hunched over a desk, and he soon realized this was a mistake. She looked into his eyes and he saw pure evil. Then she ran for him. He was stock still with shock as her body passed through him and then went straight through the wall of the library like smoke. He shouted at all of the other pupils to return to their studies, and he went back to the empty classroom to gather his thoughts. Although forbidden to light a cigarette, James came into the room to check on the teacher. His hands were shaking as he struggled to light his cigarette. James was surprised but said nothing. After a while, Mr. Small calmed down and continued blowing great plumes of smoke into the air. James tried not to cough, but he couldn't help himself. "Sorry," he said, "I just need to calm my nerves. I'd heard rumours about the lady in the library, but I never thought she was real," he added. The funny thing was that even though they all attended or worked in a ghost school, they never actually thought of themselves as ghosts or spirits as other people would see them. James couldn't cope with the smoky atmosphere any longer and went off to see the girls, and they were both sitting on the bunk beds, chatting, probably about boys, he thought. "Hi," he said, "have you heard the news?" "What news?" they said. "The lady in the library has been seen again, but this time she terrified a teacher and screamed so loud the books fell off the shelves." "Oh my God," they exclaimed, "it must have been terrifying." "I wonder why she's so angry," Anne said. "I'd love to get to the bottom of it." "Me too," said Lucy, blushing a little. "Someone must know something," James exclaimed. "Maybe we should look her up in the library." "Maybe she had a mad affair and then went even madder," said Anne helpfully. "Oh my God," they said together, "that is so cool. We will have to look into it." The next day they could hardly concentrate on the lessons, and it was made doubly difficult because it was maths. The teacher droned on and they couldn't wait for it to end. As soon as the bell rang, they headed for the library. They found a heavy, dusty book of old press clippings about the school, with all the pupils with their certificates looking proudly. There was one photo which caught their eye. The old librarian was looking very young in one photograph, and standing next to her was a serious-looking man with a glint in his eye. He was dressed in a white uniform, looking a bit like a butcher, they thought. It took them a while to realize that he was the science teacher, and by the smile on his face, he definitely had the hots for the librarian. They quickly leafed through more of the book, and near the end there was a very sad piece about her. She had sadly passed away in unusual circumstances. Now you may think, how can someone pass when they are already dead? Normal rules do not apply here. There are many layers of existence more complex than the comprehension of humans. Turning more pages, they were stunned to find the next entry: "Librarian poisoned." There was a photograph of a lady in bed with a yellow complexion. They kept flicking until they came to "Teachers arrested for murder." "Wow," they said. There was a faded looking photo of the culprit with his head down and being handcuffed away. "So that's why she's so angry," said Lucy. "I bet she was in love as well," replied Anne. James couldn't think of anything to say, so he thought a serious frown would do the trick. "I wonder what happened to the culprit," said Anne. "I don't think we're going to find out," said Lucy. "Anything outside the school grounds is out of bounds." They were stressed by the day's events, so James suggested going for a jog. The girls got changed and were ready in a flash. James wore a white vest and tight shorts showing off his physique. He set off at a fast pace with the girls puffing and panting behind him, trying not to look at his plump bottom. The grass was damp, so they had to be careful not to slip. After 10 minutes, James made a detour and headed for the woods. At the edge of the playing fields, the girls looked surprised, but carried on regardless. "Don't worry," said James without looking back. "It's an adventure." James bounded over the logs and brambles like a gazelle, and the girls were getting irritated trying to keep up with him. Further and further they went in, and the woods grew darker. An owl hooted, and the girls giggled nervously. "Hey, let's stop for a rest," Anna shouted. "5 more minutes," he replied. The girls were now soaked in sweat and in dire need of drinking water. At last James came to a stop and sat on a fallen tree. He looked remarkably unfazed. The girls sat next to him, keeping their annoyance in check. He reached into his bag and handed the girls some bottled water. Anna took it first and guzzled as if her life depended on it. Then it was Lucy's turn. She was just as enthusiastic but less noisy. James laughed. "Aren't you used to jogging?" he said. "Not that far or fast," replied Anna. She was still a little annoyed but didn't want to make a scene. It was getting darker and the woods were looking very spooky. An owl hooted again, making the girls jump. That's a good sign, he said. Guess it's time to go. The girls brushed themselves down and with heavy hearts followed him out of the woods. Unfortunately, it wasn't that easy. It had gotten so dark so quickly that he wasn't sure which way was left or right, or the right way. Lucy said left and Anna said right. James pretended to be confident and said straight on. They trudged through the brambles, which seemed to grow denser as the night drew in. The girls locked arms so as not to be parted. It's okay, said James. We're nearly there. It was at this moment that he stepped into a very cold pond. Damn, he shouted, my trainers are ruined. The water went up to his knees and he struggled to get out. It was slippery with mud and sticky. Time to turn round, said Lucy under her breath, not wanting to make the situation any more stressful. Okay, said James, let's try going left and see if that will get us out. Unfortunately, turning left just had them running into more brambles. They had no choice but to turn right. It was getting darker and the girls jumped. With the hooting of an owl and the moon between the trees appeared to move as if spying on them. By this time, Lucy and Anna were getting stressed out and tired, and very sleepy. They trudged on for another 5 minutes and then they came to a clearing. At last they could see the school in the distance. They knew they were safe. Coming up next, Chapter 6, Run.